People always ask me how I knew. They lean in, the way you do when you think a story is about to give you something secret, and they say it like there must have been a sign, a glow, a whisper in the blood, some old wives' tale come true. There was none of that, not at first. The truth is plainer and stranger for being plain. I chose a man everyone in our valley would have stepped over in the street, a man with mud on his collar and frost in his beard. I chose him on a night when choosing him could have cost me everything, and I did it for the simplest reason in the world. He looked at me like I was a person and not a prize. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the cold. I grew up in Graywater Hollow, which is a fancy name for a poor place. We were a packed town tucked into the seam of two mountains, where the sun showed up late and left early, and the wind came down off the ridge like it had a grudge. There were maybe 400 of us, all told. We knew each other's faces, each other's debts, each other's grandmothers. You couldn't sneeze in the eastern row without someone in the western row asking after your health. My family wasn't important. I want to be honest about that, because later people tried to make it sound like I was a hidden princess or something. I wasn't. My father mended traps and my mother kept bees, and I spent my girlhood with cracked knuckles and honey in my hair, learning that the world owed me nothing and would collect anyway. We were wolves, of course, shifters, but don't picture anything grand. In a place like Graywater, being a wolf mostly meant you could haul more, hunt harder, and survive a winter that would have killed an ordinary person. It didn't make us special. It made us useful. There's a difference, and poor folk feel it in their bones. The thing that ran our lives, more than the cold or the work, was the choosing. Every shifter town in the high country answered, in the end, to the crown packs. Far off, past 3 ranges, there was an alpha king who ruled the whole spread of the mountains. Most of us would live and die without ever seeing him. He was a rumor with a throne. But his law reached us anyway, and the part of his law that mattered to a girl my age was the choosing. Once a year, when the first hard snow came, the council elders would gather the unmated young people of the valley and arrange their bonds. It was supposed to be about strength, keeping bloodlines hardy, keeping the pack from going soft and scattered. That's what they told us. What it actually was a market. The strong families traded their sons and daughters like good breeding stock, and the rest of us got handed off to whoever the elders decided we were worth. I'd seen it happen to my cousin Sable 2 winters before. She was 16 and bright as a struck match, and they bonded her to a widower 3 times her age because his family owned the only mill. She used to sing. After the choosing, she stopped. I'd pass the mill and see her at the window with that flat, careful face, and something in me would go cold in a way the mountain never managed. So I knew what was coming for me. I'd known for years. The winter I turned 19, my name went on the list. I remember the morning they posted it. Frost on the inside of the window panes, my breath hanging in the kitchen, my mother very quiet over the porridge in a way that told me everything before I read a single word. I walked to the meeting hall with my collar up and read my name on the board, and beside it in the elder's cramped hand, the name they'd matched me to. Garin. I want you to understand what that name meant in Graywater Hollow, because the whole story turns on it. Garin was the son of Elder Voss, who sat at the head of our council and had sat there long enough that nobody remembered the place ever being anyone else's. The Voss family owned the high pastures, the smokehouse, half the debts in town, and a good portion of everyone's fear. Garin himself was 4 years older than me, built like a door, and handsome in the way a knife is handsome. He smiled a great deal. None of it ever reached his eyes. People said he'd be alpha of Graywater one day, when old Voss finally died. People said it the way you talk about an early frost, not good news, but no use complaining. I'd had exactly 2 conversations with Garin in my life before they bonded my name to his. In the first, when I was 15, he'd cornered me behind the smokehouse and told me what he thought my mouth was for. In the second, the winter before the choosing, he'd watched a smaller boy trip carrying water and stepped on the boy's hand instead of helping him up. Just leaned his weight onto it, slow, watching the boy's face, the way some people test how loud a thing will scream before it breaks. That was the man the council gave me to. And here is the part that I think the people who tell my story wrong always miss. I didn't refuse him out of bravery. I want to be clear about that because people love to dress it up. I wasn't brave. I was 19 and frightened half out of my skin. I refused because I'd seen Sable's face in the mill window, and I knew with a flat animal certainty that if I let them put that bond on me, the girl I was would go quiet too and never sing again. So I had 3 days. That's all the choosing gave you. 3 days between the posting and the binding night, when the bonds were sealed in front of the whole pack under the old law, and after that there was no going back. 3 days to find some way out of a thing that had no way out. I spent the first day pretending. I went to the well, I tended the hives in their winter wraps, I let my mother fuss with my hair and talk about how the Voss family always ate well, as if that were a comfort and not a cage with a full larder. I nodded. I think I even smiled. And the whole time there was a scream building in my chest with nowhere to go. It was on the second day that I met him. I'd gone up the ridge path, past the last of the houses, where the trees thin out and the wind has the whole sky to itself. I told myself I was checking the high snares. The truth is I just needed to be somewhere no one could see my face. I climbed until my legs burned and the town was a scatter of smoke threads below me, and then I sat on a cold rock and let myself fall apart, quietly, the way you learn to do when you've never been allowed the luxury of falling apart loudly. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone. There was a man at the edge of the tree line, maybe 30 paces off. He was sitting with his back against a dead pine, and he was filthy and still. I'd nearly walked past him without seeing him at all, which should have told me something right then, because in our valley a stranger was a piece of news that traveled before he did. He was a beggar, or that's what I took him for. His coat was a ruin of patches and his boots were wrapped in rags against the cold, and there was a gray roughness to him, beard and hair and skin, like a man who'd been weathered down to the grain. He had a heel of bread in one hand and he wasn't eating it. He was just watching the valley, the way I'd been watching it, like it was a thing he was trying to understand. I wiped my face fast and hard. "I didn't see you there," I said, which was a stupid thing to say and we both knew it. He looked at me. And this is the part I keep coming back to all these years later, the small hinge the whole world turned on. He looked at me, saw the red eyes and the wet face, and he didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't smile that hungry, helpful smile men give a crying girl when they smell an opening. He just turned his face back to the valley and said, in a low, rough voice, "It's a good spot for it. Quiet. Nobody up here to need anything from you." And then he held out the bread. I want to tell you I had my pride. I just spent 2 days being treated like livestock, and here was a starving man on a frozen ridge offering me the only food he had, as if my misery was a fact worth feeding. I should have said no. Instead, I started crying again, properly this time, and I sat down a little ways off, and I took the bread and broke it and gave him half back, and we ate it together without saying anything. And it was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in longer than I could remember. His name, he said, was Rook. He didn't offer more than that, and I didn't push. In Greywater, you learned early that everyone's carrying something they'd rather not set down in front of strangers. We talked. Not about my trouble, he never once asked me to explain the tears, and somehow that made it easier to tell him things. I talked about the bees, about my cousin Sable, about the way the light came down the eastern ridge in summer for about an hour and made the whole sorry town look like somewhere you'd want to stay. He listened the way almost no one listens, like the words were going somewhere and being kept. He told me almost nothing about himself, and what he did tell me I half believed. He'd been a soldier once, he said. He'd lost people. He'd come up into the high country to walk and think and be no one for a while, and he was finding that being no one was harder country than he'd expected. There was a tiredness in him that wasn't about hunger or cold. I recognized it. It was the tiredness of someone carrying a thing too heavy to put down and too important to drop. The light started to go. I knew I had to get back before the dark and before my absence turned into a question I couldn't answer. I stood and brushed the snow off, and I didn't want to leave, and that frightened me more than Garen did. "Will you be up here tomorrow?" I asked him. The binding was the next night. I don't know what I thought he could do about it. Nothing. He was a starving stranger with rags on his boots, but I asked anyway. Rook looked at me for a long moment. There was something working behind his eyes, some decision I couldn't read. "I'll be where you need me," he said finally, "whatever that turns out to mean." I should have asked him what he meant. I went home instead, with the taste of cold bread still in my mouth and a warmth in my chest I had no business feeling the night before they meant to sell me. That was the second day. The third day was the binding. The whole valley turned out for a binding night. There was nothing else to do in the dead of winter, and there was nothing people loved more than watching other people's fates get decided. The meeting hall couldn't hold us all, so they held it outside, in the big clearing at the center of town where the old bonding stone stood. A flat gray slab taller than a man, worn smooth by more hands than anyone could count. They lit the bonfires at dusk. I remember the smell of pitch and pine smoke, and the way the cold pressed in just past the reach of the flames, so that you were roasting on one side and freezing on the other, the whole pack shifting and stamping to stay warm. The snow had started again, fine and dry, drifting down through the firelight like ash going the wrong way. I stood with the other chosen in a row near the stone. There were 6 of us that year. I knew them all. The Holloway boy, white-faced, bonded to a girl 2 ridges over he'd never met. The miller's daughter, who at least seemed pleased. And me, in the one good dress my mother owned, with my hair braided tight and my hands so cold I couldn't feel my own fingers, waiting for Elder Voss to call my name and Garen's together and make it real in front of everyone I'd ever known. Garen stood across the clearing with his father. He was watching me. He'd been watching me all evening, and there was a lazy ownership in it, a man inspecting a thing already bought. Every now and then he'd say something to the men beside him and they'd laugh, and I'd feel the laugh land on me even though I couldn't hear it. Elder Voss began the binding the way he always did, with the old words. The pack is one body, the strong carry the weak. The bond endures past blood and past death. It's beautiful, that liturgy, if you don't think too hard about whose strength it served and whose weakness it fed on. The crowd murmured the responses. The fires snapped. My heart was going so hard I thought the people beside me must be able to hear it. He bound the Holloway boy first, then the miller's daughter. Each time the 2 of them stepped up to the stone, pressed their palms to the cold slab, and Voss spoke the binding over them, and that was that. A life decided in the time it takes to boil an egg. Then he called my name, and Garen's. I want to tell you that I had a plan. I didn't. I'd lain awake the whole night before with my mind running in circles like a trapped animal, and I'd come up with nothing because there was nothing. The law was the law. To refuse a binding before the pack was to put yourself outside the pack entirely, no protection, no claim, no place. An exile in the high country in deep winter was a corpse that hadn't finished dying yet. Everyone knew that. The threat didn't even need saying. Garen stepped up to the stone, smiling. He held out his hand to me, palm up, like a man helping a lady from a carriage, and the worst part was that to anyone watching it looked gracious. I looked at his hand. I looked at his face. I looked past him, into the dark beyond the fires where the trees started, and I thought about a man on a frozen ridge who'd looked at my wet face and offered me bread without asking why. And I did the only thing I could think to do. I said no. It came out small. The fires were loud and the wind was loud, and at first I don't think more than a few people even heard it. So I said it again, louder. And this time my voice cracked clean across the clearing, and the murmuring stopped all at once, the way a flock of birds goes silent. "No," I said, "I won't bind to him. I refuse the match." You could have heard the snow land. Elder Voss's face did something I'd never seen it do. It went still, and then it went dangerous. "The match is made, girl," he said. "By the council, by the law, you don't refuse a binding. You'll bring shame on your blood and your house." "Then I'll carry it," I said. My whole body was shaking. "I won't bind to your son. I'd sooner take a beggar's hand than his." I don't know why I said that last part. The words just came up out of me, out of the warm place in my chest where a frozen ridge and a heel of bread had been living for a day. It was a foolish thing to say. It was the kind of thing you say when you've decided to drown and you want to at least pick the water. The crowd erupted. Some of it was scandal, some of it was something darker, the hungry buzz of people who have come for a show and just been handed a better one. Garen's smile was gone. His face had gone the color of meat, and I watched something cruel and patient move into his eyes, and I understood that whatever happened next, he was going to enjoy making me pay for it. Elder Voss raised his hand for quiet. He got it. "A beggar's hand," he repeated, slow, savoring it, turning my own words into the rope to hang me with. "Very well. The law allows it, though no one's been fool enough to invoke it in my lifetime. If a chosen refuses her match, she may name another before the pack. Any free wolf may answer the claim. But understand me, girl," and here he smiled, and it was Garen's smile. I saw where the boy had learned it. "If no one answers, the refusal stands as exile. You'll walk out of this valley tonight, alone, into the snow, and no one here will lift a finger to stop the mountain from taking you." He spread his hands to the crowd. "So, is there a free wolf who will answer this girl's claim, or does she freeze for her pride?" He said it as a joke. The whole clearing understood it as a joke. There was nervous laughter, the kind that's really just fear with somewhere to go. Who would answer? Who would stand up in front of the Voss family and take their cast off, their humiliated refuser, and earn old Voss for an enemy in the same breath? No one in Greywater Hollow was that stupid or that free. The laughter rolled and died, the fires snapped, the snow kept coming down. And then from the dark beyond the firelight where the trees started, a voice said, "I'll answer." I knew it before I turned. I'd have known that low, rough voice in my grave. Rook stepped out of the dark into the ring of firelight, and the laughter strangled itself dead. He looked exactly as he had on the ridge. Filthy coat, rag-wrapped boots, gray, weathered face. A beggar, head to foot, walking into the most powerful gathering in the valley like he was strolling up to a market stall. The contrast was so absurd that for a second nobody even reacted. Here was the punchline made flesh. The girl had said she'd sooner take a beggar, and the mountain had sent her one. The crowd lost itself. People were laughing so hard they had to hold each other up. Garen threw his head back and roared with it. Even some of the elders cracked. It was, I'll admit, the single most humiliating moment of my entire life, watching the whole valley howl at the sight of the ragged stranger who'd come to claim me, and knowing I'd done it to myself. But I was watching Rook's face, and Rook wasn't laughing. He walked through the laughter like a man walking through rain, like it couldn't touch him, and the closer he got to the bonding stone the quieter it got, because there was something in the way he moved that didn't match the rags. I'd noticed it on the ridge and not understood it. A stillness, a way of taking up space that had nothing to do with size. He walked like the ground had agreed to be where he put his feet. He stopped a few paces from Elder Voss. And Voss, who'd faced down every hard man in the valley for 40 years, took half a step back before he caught himself. "You," Voss said. "You're not Pack, I've never seen your face." "No," Rook agreed, "you haven't." "Then you've no claim to answer. The law says a free wolf of the pack." "The law," Rook said, and his voice didn't rise at all, which was somehow worse than if it had, "says any free wolf may answer. You added the rest just now, hopping no one would check." He tilted his head. "You quoted the old words beautifully tonight, Elder. The pack is one body. The strong carry the weak. Did you believe them when you said them? Or are they just the noise you make while you sort the strong from the weak so you can eat the weak yourself?" The clearing had gone very, very quiet. Garen had stopped laughing. "Who are you?" Voss said. The bluster was gone from his voice now. He'd heard it too, that thing in the stranger that didn't fit. "Give me your name." And Rook looked at me just for a moment across the firelight in the snow. There was an apology in it. I didn't understand the apology yet. I would. "My name," he said, turning back to Voss, "is Cain." I felt the word go through the crowd like a crack going through ice. You have to understand, out in the high country in the poor towns, the Alpha King wasn't a man so much as a story. A name parents used. A weight behind the law. Most of us had never seen so much as a portrait. He was 3 ranges away and might as well have been on the moon. So when the beggar said the name Cain, the crowd didn't fall to its knees because the crowd didn't believe it. Couldn't. It was Elder Voss who believed it first. I watched it happen on his face. Voss was old enough and important enough that he'd been to the Crown Packs once or twice in his youth. He'd seen things the rest of us hadn't. And whatever he'd seen, it was enough that when the ragged stranger said his name, the blood went out of the old man's face like wine out of a tipped cup. "That's not possible," Voss whispered. "The king doesn't, he wouldn't be." "Wandering the high passes dressed like a beggar," Cain finished. He reached up almost tiredly and pulled the rough scarf down from his neck. There was a mark there, burned or branded into the skin below his collarbone, a thing I couldn't make out from where I stood, but Voss could, and the old man made a sound like he'd been struck. "I've been 3 months on the road through my own kingdom, Elder, walking the towns, sitting at the edges of things, listening." His voice was still low, still even, and every word of it carried to the back of the crowd in the dead silence. "A king hears a great deal of pretty noise when he travels with a crown on. I wanted to hear the rest. So I took the crown off and put on a dead man's coat, and I walked, and I sat at the edge of towns like this one. And I learned what my law actually does when it gets down into the cold, where I'm not looking." He turned slowly and looked out over all of us. 400 faces in the firelight, snow in our hair, our breath hanging. "I sat at the edge of this valley for 2 days, he said. "I watched you sell your children to each other and call it strength. I watched a council eat the weak and quote me the old words while they chewed." His eyes found the row of the chosen, the Halloway boy, the miller's daughter, the trembling rest of us, and something in his face was terrible and sad all at once. "The pack is one body. I wrote that into the law myself, a long time ago, when I was younger and thought writing a true thing down was the same as making it true. And you turned it into a butcher's prayer." Nobody moved. Garin had gone the color of the snow. Elder Voss had sunk to one knee in it, and around the clearing, slowly like a wave finding the shore, the whole pack was going down with him. 400 wolves kneeling in the snow before a man in rags, and the rags didn't matter at all anymore. I understood, finally, what I'd seen on the ridge. The stillness. The way the ground agreed to be where he stepped. It hadn't been a beggar's patience. It had been a king's, worn so long it had stopped looking like anything but tiredness. I was the only one still standing. I think I'd forgotten how to kneel. I was just staring at him, at the man who'd shared his bread with me and listened to me talk about my bees, and I felt the floor of the world tilt under me, because the warm thing in my chest and the impossible thing in front of me were the same thing, and I didn't know how to hold both at once. Cain looked at me. And here's the part I've never been able to explain properly, the part people don't believe even when I swear to it. He looked nervous. The Alpha King of the whole high country, with 400 of his subjects kneeling in the snow and an old man weeping at his feet. He looked at a beekeeper's daughter in a borrowed dress, and there was something uncertain in his eyes, something that had nothing to do with crowns. "You said," he began and stopped and started again, "on the ridge. You didn't know who I was." "No," I managed. "You shared your bread with a beggar who looked like he'd steal it back. You sat with me when you had your own troubles to drown in. And tonight you stood up in front of every soul you've ever known and said you'd sooner take that beggar's hand than bind to a cruelty you couldn't stomach." He took a step toward me. The snow crunched. "I came up into these mountains to find out what was true. I'd nearly stopped believing anything was. And then a girl gave me half a heel of bread on a frozen ridge, and didn't want a single thing back. He stopped in front of me. Up close I could see how tired he really was, how human under the weight of the name. "I answered your claim, Wren," he said quietly, and the use of my name nearly undid me. "I'll honor it if you'll have it, but I want you to hear me say this where everyone can hear it because it matters more than the rest." He raised his voice, and it rang off the bonding stone. "I'm not claiming her as a king. A king claiming a poor girl in front of her pack is just another powerful man taking what he wants and calling it kindness. I won't do that to you, and I won't do it in front of them." He looked at me, only at me. "I'm asking you, as the beggar you fed, knowing now what I am and what it costs, and that you can say no and walk back to your bees and your mother and never see me again, and I'll see to it that no one in this valley ever troubles you for it as long as they live." His voice dropped just for me. "Choose, for real this time, not against Garen, not against your fear, for yourself." I want to tell you I had a beautiful answer ready. I didn't. I'd never in my life been asked to choose anything. Choosing was a thing that happened to me, decided by elders and seasons and the price of mills. And here was a man, a king, who'd torn the whole machine of my fate apart with one word and then handed me the pieces and stepped back and said, you decide." I thought about Sable in the mill window with her flat, quiet face. I thought about how close I'd come to wearing it. I reached up, and I put my cold hand against his rough cheek, the way you'd touch someone to make sure they were real, and I said the truest thing I had. "On the ridge," I said, "before I knew anything, I didn't want to leave you. That frightened me more than Garen did." I felt myself start to cry, and for once I didn't fight it. "I'm not choosing the king. I don't know the king. I'm choosing the man who didn't ask me why I was crying, if he's the same man under all of it." "He's the same man," Kane said. His voice wasn't even any more. "Underneath, he's only ever been the same tired man looking for one true thing." And then he kissed me. In the snow, in front of the whole kneeling valley, a beggar king kissed a beekeeper's daughter, and it was nothing like the stories. It was clumsy and cold, and our noses bumped, and we were both half crying. It was the realest thing that had ever happened to me. I'd like to say everything after was simple. It wasn't. There were complications you'd expect. A poor girl doesn't become anything overnight, and a court 3 ranges away didn't fall in love with me just because the king had. There were years where I felt like a stranger wearing borrowed dignity the way I'd once worn a borrowed dress. Kane never let me face any of it alone, but it was hard, and I won't pretend it wasn't. But Greywater Hollow changed that winter, and the changes held. Elder Voss never sat at the head of the council again. Kane didn't have him killed. The way the old stories say a king should, he did something the old man hated far more. He left him alive, stripped of his pastures and his power, to grow old in a valley that no longer feared his name. Garen left within the year. I heard he tried to make himself important in another town, and discovered that cruelty only impresses people who think you'll win. Last I knew, he was no one somewhere, and the thought brings me no joy and no sorrow. He's just gone, like a frost that lifts. The choosing ended. Not just in Greywater. Kane carried what he'd learned on the road back to the Crown packs, and he tore the old matching law up at the root. There were bonds made after that, of course. Wolves still found each other, still mated, still built the long, warm chains of family that hold a pack together against the cold. But no elder ever again pressed a child's palm to a stone and called it strength while they sorted the strong from the weak to feed on. The pack is one body. He made it true in the end, or as near to true as a stubborn man and a long life can manage. My cousin Sable started singing again. It took years. But I was there in the meeting hall the night her voice came back, cracked and rusty and beautiful, and I had to leave before the end because I was crying too hard to be polite. People still ask me how I knew. I tell them the truth, the plain, strange truth. I didn't know anything. I wasn't brave, and I wasn't wise, and I had no sign in my blood. I was a frightened girl on a frozen ridge who got offered a piece of bread by a man too tired to want anything from her. And I learned in that one small moment what I'd never learned in 19 years of being told what I was worth. That you can tell almost everything about a person, by how they treat you when they think you're no one. The world spent my whole girlhood teaching me to measure people by what they had. Garen had everything, and he'd have crushed my hand under his boot for the pleasure of hearing it break. Cain had a kingdom, and he hid it under rags and shared his last bread with a crying stranger, because somewhere under the crown he was still the kind of man who'd do that whether anyone was watching or not. I didn't choose a beggar over a prince. That's the part the stories get wrong every time. I chose the only man in the valley who treated me like I was already free, and it turned out he was the one man alive who could make it so. That's not magic, that's not fate. That's just two people on a cold ridge sharing bread asking nothing. And I'd do it again. Every freezing, foolish, impossible bit of it, I'd do it again.